This guide is meant for the semi-casual Diablo 4 enjoyer who doesn't necessarily want to go and grind out Uber uniques from Duriel or Uber tuning stones from Malphas, and yet still wishes to have a decently competitive shot at the Diablo 4 Gauntlet leaderboards. And before we get into the strategies, here's a little bit on my current levels of success as well as a bit of context. So as you can see, I'm currently ranked roughly 500 plus, which isn't stellar, but if you consider that I have 0 Uber uniques, 0 Uber tuning stones, my Paragon glyphs aren't even maxed out, and there's actually quite a few things I could still improve in my gear. For example, I don't yet have the Metamorphosis aspect, which was just added with the latest patch, which I think is actually a lot better than what I'm currently running. But I think I've done well enough for myself without really wanting to go out of my way to farm up a specific aspect just to rank slightly higher on the leaderboard, right? Nor do I really want to go and grind out Uber Duriel and whatnot just to get some Uber uniques. Especially since with my current ranking, I'm actually fairly competitive with a lot of players that I've noticed around my rankings that do have these Uber uniques like the Ring of Starlit Skies, Harlequin Crest, a variant Spear of Lysander as a druid. All in all, as a self-proclaimed semi-casual Diablo 4 player, I'm pretty happy with my results, especially since I've actually gotten enough score to be able to get all the loot rewards for the week. And also, I don't really want to spend the extra time grinding stuff out just to do a little bit better when I think I could spend my time better playing something else. And with that, let's get into the tips, starting with some of the basic requirements as well as what to prioritize for affixes and aspects on your gear. And starting with defense, and it's that you actually don't need much of it. Because not only is the Gauntlet quite easy relatively speaking to some of the other endgame content, with monsters being equivalent to Nightmare Dungeon level 70 monsters, which means that to reach armor cap for them, your armor would need to be about 11,000 or slightly above that. But even with my gear not getting even very close to 11,000 armor, I find myself not dying at all in the Gauntlet, as long as I also have a few other defensive stats like damage reduction type stats on a few pieces of my gear. And with merely just one armor percentage roll affix across all of my gear right now. And as for resists, you still want to try to have max resists if you can, which is 70 across the board. But my character doesn't have completely maxed out resists, with a couple being at 50-ish, and I'm still doing just fine in the Gauntlet. And with the basic defense necessities out of the way, as long as you're not dying in the Gauntlet, which, by the way, if you die, the penalty is actually really large as you lose a bunch of your score. So you definitely want to meet that sort of minimum threshold for not dying, which is not hard to hit at all. But after you meet that requirement, you'll definitely want to also focus on movement speed as pretty much a requirement, in my opinion, to try to get as close to the 200% movement speed cap at all times as possible. Or if you have the Metamorphosis aspect, to be able to have that and just spam evade while also having near capped or capped movement speed nearly at all times. And to reach 200% movement speed, you actually would just need plus 100% across your gear or aspects, right? And first of all, you'll want movement speed rolls generally on both your boots and amulet, with both being cappable at around 26 each. So that actually takes care of half the requirement if you're able to get those high rolls. And the current meta, even though I don't yet have this aspect, is again to have the aspect of Metamorphosis to be able to sort of spam teleport with your evade, which is turning you into a cloud of bats, which will move you across the map really quickly. So to pair that, say on your boots or amulet, with another movement speed aspect, such as Ghostwalker probably being the best choice, because that also combos with Metamorphosis as it gives you extra movement speed up to 25% with the max roll when you or after you become unstoppable. And with the addition of Ghostwalker aspect, you would essentially just need to take care of the remaining 25% bonus movement speed to cap out, which depending on your class can come in various forms. For example, on my druid, I can actually get 9% just from my skill tree by using a werewolf-centric spec, which my spec is. So that takes care of roughly 9 to 10%. And the last 15% I get from my unique chests, the Mad Wolf's Glee, which will give me another 15%, bringing me to, or very close to cap. And one more thing that is pretty much a must for the Gauntlet is Shrine Buff Duration, which again can spawn only on your boots and amulet. So both of these affixes you want to get near maximum if you can, because this will greatly increase your effectiveness in the Gauntlet, as not only will bosses grant shrines that you can get and then stack up once you kill multiple bosses, but there are also these so-called pillars, which are like special shrines in the Gauntlet, which will give you extra bonus score, which if you have shrine buff duration will greatly increase your amount of points as well. And with all these essential requirements, so to speak, out of the way for the Gauntlet, the rest of your efforts should be focused on offense, which might seem pretty obvious, but more specifically, you want to focus on some of the weaknesses or limiting factors that are sort of hampering your progress in the Gauntlet. For example, usually this will be boss killing speed or single target damage as opposed to AoE, which is generally more easy to come by. For example, you might want to just focus more on your boss killing capabilities with your build. And to extend that even further, since the Gauntlet changes every week, and since I believe there's a chance that Blizzard sort of throws a curveball from time to time and gives us a different type of Gauntlet, which might actually require or be optimized for different types of specs, I guess I can dream, but even if that wasn't necessarily the case, you would still probably benefit from having somewhat slightly different types of gear optimization choices for your spec, or even pieces of gear that could be used for different types of specs in case you want to pivot to a different spec as well for that week. And on to some general tips for greatly improving your score in the Gauntlet regardless of the week and the layout. My first tip I have for you is to plan around the Pillar of Proving and the Pillar of Glory, with again the Pillar of Proving being the one that resummons all the monsters in the Gauntlet, and the one of Glory, or the Pillar of Glory, being the one that gives you a score boost, a significant one at that, to whenever you kill monsters. So for example, what you can do is actually double dip on both pillars, especially if they're close by. So for example, you can first pick up the Pillar of Glory to get a score boost, kill a bunch of monsters and bosses in the vicinity, and then activate the Pillar of Proving while the Pillar of Glory is still active, and go and kill all those elites and bosses again, right? You especially want to strategize this also around stacking as many bosses and elites as you can, and also golden chests if it happens to also be in the vicinity, as these will all greatly increase your score, much more so than just using it for regular monster kills. And with that, I already briefly alluded to it, but especially if you don't yet have a bunch of Uber uniques and whatnot, or there's some specificity to your build, in the Gauntlet, you don't necessarily have to go through each and every elite pack or each and every boss, right? Especially since I found that some of the bosses have somewhat different health pools, with some being much more quicker to kill, and with some having more HP or having these mechanics that like stun you or like blind you, like the Tomb Lord, which could make it a bit longer to kill. So you can actually consider skipping some of the bosses, at least for some of the rounds through the Gauntlet. For example, you can then decide to go and kill them on certain rounds where you have certain pillars going, and also some shrines that are running from killing some of the other easier to down bosses to have a power boost to be able to kill them. But essentially, it's not always worth your time, especially if a boss is a bit more far out, to kill a boss, even though they each grant about 9,000 points and a shrine. And of course, as I talked about earlier with the pillars tip, it is generally best to stack bosses with when you have the Pillar of Glory active, and if you have another shrine active from killing another boss, and or if you also have a Pillar of Proving nearby, which once you down some of the bosses and pick up the shrines and stack a bunch of pillars and shrines up, you can then reactivate the Pillar of Proving to then go and down a bunch of bosses again, to then keep the snowball rolling in that way, right? You sort of want to ramp up towards the end typically of a Gauntlet run, trying to utilize all the pillars that you can and all the revives or the Pillars of Proving that you can to stack the elites and especially bosses with all these pillars as well as possible. That's sort of the crux of optimizing any Gauntlet run, in my opinion. Next, even though admittedly the Gauntlet is probably not the most exciting thing for me, at least, to like try to theory craft and plan around, I do think that using a map, or rather a website tool for the Gauntlet each week, can be really helpful and can end up saving you a lot of effort with having to sort of feel out the map for yourself, as you can actually just check out the map that is uploaded online from the website d4builds.gg, the Gauntlet map link that you can go to check out not only the layout for the week, but also where all the pillars, the elite packs, and the bosses are for the week. This will actually greatly help you navigate the Gauntlet. I suggest taking a look at it before each run, and also if you can, having it on the side open on, say, a second monitor or on your phone to be able to glance at while you run through the Gauntlet. That has been extremely helpful for me. And an even more advanced tip, which I think has been really helpful to me, is to check out some of the blasters like Rudijo or Rob. These content creators will usually release sort of a preliminary route for each week's Gauntlet very early on in the week that you can roughly follow. They might not be the absolute best for like each build and class, but I like to use it as a guideline for then sort of tweaking the strategy to myself, right? So for example, for this week, I looked at Rudijo's preliminary route for the first Gauntlet map, and I actually added a couple of notes to it just by saving the image to Paint, and then just adding some of my own notes to it, like when I should activate each shrine, when I should open the chest, which bosses I should skip, and so on and so forth, right? I just added my own notes on Paint, and even though this seems like quite a bit of work, I still think that this type of planning saves me even more time and energy compared to having to just like go through and grind through the map 8 minutes each and just having to get a feel for it that way, right? By combining maps that have been released online, people's strategies, and also the layout of, you know, all the pillars and elites and bosses that have already been revealed online, I can much more easily and more efficiently plan for a higher score in the Gauntlet. And those are some cutting edge and general tips for optimizing your score even as a semi-casual or casual player in the Gauntlet each week in Diablo 4. There are some other minor things that I hadn't mentioned yet, like farming up mats for consumables, which are usable in the Gauntlet, which in my opinion should not be something that is usable. And also like being able to pick up a shrine before a Gauntlet and it actually still being active once you enter, which will probably get fixed soon. But all in all, those are pretty much all the things I wanted to share for now. Let me know if there's any other tips you want to share in the comment section below. We would greatly appreciate it, and I'll definitely reply to your comment. Anyhow, happy hunting. Perhaps you're also playing a bit of Last Epoch on the side like I am. But anyhow, hopefully Diablo 4 becomes a more fun game as they add additional pieces of endgame and even improve upon the Gauntlet in the future, for which I'll probably make another video on that as well. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.